Cette soirée,
This
je ne vais pas être long.
evening, and
Cette
I will
soirée
make it
de
short.
conférence dans le cadre des 3 jours,
This evening
Basta,
conference in the
Ori,
framework of
politiques
Basta
européennes,
Enough
a été convoquée
Ori
par le réseau
to European policies has been convened by the Alta Summit and Marchas for la Dignidad, who came to Brussels
Cette
yesterday.
soirée part d'une question.
This evening conference starts with a question.
Cette soirée part d'une question. Après la nuit de la honte du 13 juillet,
After the coup d'etat of the 13th of July, after the night, the IMF, the World Bank, and the heads of
le
state
seul gouvernement démocratiquement élu de l'Union européenne
submitted the only democratically elected government who decided enough with austerity. And in this new situation for Europe, and I must add to that there is a terrible and dramatic migration crisis. Borders are being closed, and we now have three-tiered question. Is there still an alternative to austerity? Or is it over already?
Que signifie encore le mot démocratie après le 13 juillet?
What does democracy still mean?
Et que signifie le mot souveraineté?
And what about sovereignty?
Lorsque l'on voit que c'est le même mot souveraineté qui est
we see that sovereignty is highlighted by Tsipras government to ask it not to follow European austerity policies. It's also the same word used by Marine Le Pen to attract far-right votes. It's also used by Viktor Orban when he decides that the country doesn't have to comply with human rights policies and regulations. So is there still an alternative to austerity? Is democracy still meaningful? And what about the meaning of sovereignty? We're not going to deal with these questions in an academic way, even if we are in a university building. We are a social movement fighting against that Europe for years. So we've divided the debate into 3 parts. And without further ado, I give the floor to the 2 facilitators of the debate. And by the way, thank you very much to the 2 of you. Thank you for taking the initiative of this conference. Thank you very much for developing conclusions that we can use from a political perspective. Thank you for having dealt with political leaders and rulers. And until the end of the debate, my role will be easy but also unpleasant. Indeed, I will have to make sure that we end at 10. And it will be difficult with the 37 minutes delay. So what we'll do is finish at 10:15. So we'll try to cut it short. So when a speaker will be getting close to the end of the time allocated, I will do this. It will be a reminder. And when the speaker reaches the end of his time, I will be less pleasant and I will make more noise. And if a speaker was to use more time, then it will become unbearable, and I will do this continuous noise that is unpleasant for you as well as for me. So I would like to apologize in advance to the speakers. It's quite stupid, but it's absolutely necessary for me to behave in this way for our debate to remain meaningful. So now we've put the large number of speakers under pressure. They will have to meet a challenge. So I thank you very much, and I thank Ludovic Flamand. He is a journalist for Mediapart, a well-known media. Thank you to Anissa Benchikroun, who is an expert in employment issues. She is an activist for Attac Brussels. So Anissa and Ludovic will be facilitating the debate.
Bonsoir.
Good evening. Does this microphone work? Yes. Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you, Felipe, for your introduction. So without further ado, let's start the first part of the conference. It's the most theoretical and analytical part. So we'll start with Susan George and Ronald Janssens. So with the two of them, we will come back to two words mentioned by Felipe: democracy and sovereignty in the Eurozone. After the summer we've experienced, it was marked by the follow-up to the negotiation on TTIP, the famous treaty with the US, then the 13th of July agreement between Europe and Greece, and the signature of a third memorandum for Greece. So after such a summer, I think that it's important to come back to these concepts. So what do we mean when we refer to sovereignty today? How can we define it? How can we make sure that we don't fall back to the national dimension? How can you define sovereignty? So I first give the floor to Susan George. You are co-founder of Attac France. You've written a large number of books on the TTIP recently, so we listen to you. Thank you very much.
Merci et bonsoir.
Thank you and good evening, dear friends, dear colleagues. The question that is raised by the Alter Summit, and by the way, thank you for having invited me. How could European social movement find a way out of the crisis?
The question being, how can social movements in Europe help to build a way out of austerity? Let me first give you what I see as the good news. We've had some good news. Jeremy Corbyn, Podemos, Syriza, even if we're disappointed, and so are they, but they've planted some seeds which are beginning to grow throughout Europe. In Portugal, apparently, it could very well be a left-wing coalition. They can't seem to form a government with the right, and Portugal might become another interesting case. We don't know yet. But there are good things happening, and I think that the reaction to the TTIP and the fact that we were able to collect 3.25 million signatures against this terrible treaty between the United States and the EU is an excellent sign, and congratulations to the Germans who brought 250,000 people out into the streets last weekend. Well, we've also got, unfortunately, some bad news. But let me say first, I think we can win. I'm not here to be Cassandra and say it's all over and it's finished and we're going to lose, not at all. But the question is also, what are the alternatives to austerity? That sounds to me like a Margaret Thatcher question. Margaret Thatcher would have said, there is no alternative. Tina. And I say, Tata, there are thousands of alternatives. So, these are the alternatives that we have to build. And I believe that we must start by understanding that we have to defend our ideas. Progressives think that, of course, their ideas are the best. Of course, it's better to have equality rather than inequality. Of course, it's better to have freedom of speech than everybody having to shut up, etc., etc. But we have not defended our ideas, and consequently, the neoliberals, who know a lot about rhetoric and have spent an enormous amount of money publicizing their ideas, have infected the entire world, beginning with the United States, moving on to Europe, and now throughout the world. And they have had some, unfortunately, very great successes. And their discourse about the market solving everything and people being too greedy and we have to cut back and we have to tighten our belts and et cetera, is a language which has been accepted by a great many people, and a great many people thought that the Greeks got exactly what they deserved, which is simply not the case. But we have to have a discourse which is convincing, where we have changed our vocabulary and we force them to change their vocabulary. If I have time, I'd like to give you just a couple of examples. The way the European Union talks about stakeholders. I'm speaking in English, and you're not all obviously English-speaking natives. But that word means a stake is always something about business or a bet or something commercial. It has nothing to do with citizenship. And stakeholder has evacuated the whole notion of being a citizen. They don't want us to consider ourselves citizens, no. And only the people that they say are stakeholders can be stakeholders. You and I are not, almost all of the time. They're not interested in our opinions. And another word like that is becoming regulatory cooperation, which sounds like a really good idea. It's always nice to cooperate, but they don't say with whom we would be cooperating. It's with the biggest businesses in the world who want to set things up in the treaty so that they can be the regulators inside and outside of the treaty for the rest of the life of the European Union. That's what it's about. And they have what they call a better regulation agenda, which we have to start calling the agenda for worse regulation, because it is the companies that would be setting the rules. Now, Gramsci, you probably all know the name of Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher, communist, died in a fascist prison in 1928, and he said, you can't rule simply with violence and with force. You have to get into people's heads. And to do that, you have to make what he called the long march through the institutions. And that is one of our major tasks now, to make that long march and to make sure that it is our discourse that is the most prominent one and that gradually gets into people's heads in the place of the doctrine, the ideology, the religion of neoliberalism. Now, the Long March includes the effort to make people understand that the European Union is becoming less and less democratic every year. Mr. Schäuble and Mr. Juncker have been very clear on that point. A democratic election is not going to change anything. Mrs. Malmström has recently said, I don't take my mandate from the European people. Now, there's a very good 10-word sentence that tells us exactly where we are. I do not take my mandate from the European people. And the question that austerity is trying to put on the table is that no right, no victory of progressives throughout history is definitive. We always have to keep fighting for those rights because otherwise they want to take them back. For example, in the so-called 5 Presidents report, that's, first of all, parenthesis, a terrible title, because they're not 5 presidents. At most, they're 3. Mr. Dijsselbloem, or however you pronounce it, I'm sorry to the Dutch, Dijsselbloem, is not a president of anything. He's the president of the Eurogroup, but the Eurogroup is simply not a democratic institution. Nobody elected him except other members of the European, of the Eurogroup. And Mr. Draghi is following a mandate which was largely set by the Bundesbank, and I wouldn't say he's the president either. But anyway, they have made it very obvious that labor does not have permanent rights. They want a body. It's one of the few concrete proposals they made. They want a body which could simply set European wages. Madame Segol of the European Trade Union Commission has said this is absolutely impossible for trade unions to accept, and she's absolutely right. But it shows that they believe that they can simply decree that the hard-won rights, the victories of people in the past decades simply don't count, and we have to keep on working, working to preserve those rights in order to move forward. Now, of course, we know that austerity doesn't work. If by austerity working, you mean it works for ordinary people and for society in general. We know that it doesn't work, and it cannot work, because what it does is reduce demand to the point that nobody wants to invest. Nobody is going to employ very many workers because they can't sell their products. It's very simple. Joseph Stiglitz has explained this in extremely clear language. No demand, no jobs, no prosperity. And the cost of labor is the only thing that interests the European Union. They never ask what is the cost of capital. But last year, in France at least, the cost of capital went up by 30% because the dividends to owners of shares went up by 30% in 2014. The cost of capital is enormous. We are not suffering from a lack of money. We are suffering from, first of all, always the same people at the 1% of 1% of 1% are taking that money, and what they don't take is put in tax havens, where we now know that there are somewhere between 21 and 32 trillion dollars. That is 21 with 12 zeros. Well, austerity doesn't work, but it does work for business. And this is a symptom of this, is that François Hollande in France is giving 33 billion euros every year to big business and praying, getting on his knees and asking them to create jobs. But they're not going to do that for the reasons I just gave. This is a present to business, and which simply contributes to more inequality and worse unemployment. I would like to go on to the question of the TTIP, because I think this is one place where we can have really a spectacular victory if we remain united and if we keep on working. First of all, there's something for everybody in the TTIP to hate. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be a farmer, a worker, an ecologist, you can be even a small business person, you can simply be an ordinary Democrat, and you will find something in the CETA and the TTIP to hate. And we can keep on gathering signatures, and we intend to keep on gathering signatures. But it seems to me that it is now the time that we have to go after the parliamentarians. We have to start. That's one way of getting rid of this treaty, is to tell the parliamentarians that if they vote for the CETA and the TTIP, we will not vote for them. It's as simple as that. And we will campaign against them. And I think that we have to ask once more our German friends to be spectacularly effective, because unfortunately it is the German ordoliberalism that has colored the social democratic parties. Don't expect anything from the European Popular Party. The right wing is not going to give us anything. But the social democrats could be convinced, because they are living in a kind of contradiction, which is cannot be sustained, in my view. And so we have to keep on trying to convince the parliamentarians that they have no reason to vote for the TTIP. There's almost no democracy now at the European level. But we can at least use the language of a man that I admire. I didn't always admire him. He was the second in command to Pascal Lamy, when Pascal Lamy was the European Trade Commissioner, and we had a lot of fights with him. And then after that, we had a lot of fights with him at the WTO. But Pierre de Freyne, who was his second, his head of cabinet and also the second man in the commission, has said the following: there is systematic collusion of the European Commission with business circles. Let's remember that. We can go after individual businesses, but not the small ones, obviously. The great big businesses which are pushing for the TTIP because they think it is going to make them an enormous amount of money. I think we have a lot of power together if we stay together. Something extremely positive is that this campaign has become a truly European campaign. We are united in Europe. This is the first time I've seen this happen. And the signatures come from all over. The only countries missing are the 3 Baltic countries, Malta and Cyprus. Everybody else has met their quota. So let's use the power that we have. We can hope that the elites will see that they have gone too far and that they will change their behavior. But unfortunately, historically, we know that the elites always try to go too far. So I'll close with the slogan, which so many other good fighters for democracy have used: if not us, who? If not now, when? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Suzanne George.
Thank you very much, Susan George. And to pick up on what you said, you refer to an ordoliberal Europe. You also refer to the 5 presidents' report on the future of Europe, but also democracy-related issues, democracy that is no longer present in Europe. Now the floor is yours. Ronald Janssens, you are an economist working for European Trade Union Institute, and we think that it's important to come back to the way you see things in the Eurozone. Shall we totally rebuild the Eurozone or not? Because we're talking about institutional or the institutional dimension in TTIP, the ordoliberal dimension that is too strong in the treaty.
Good evening. I will also speak in English. Now, Susan George has talked about the dangers for democracy that are coming from outside Europe. I would like to focus in my 15 minutes on the dangers to democracy that are coming from inside Europe, from the European institutions themselves. And I think we all know that the case of Greece here is a very clear case. It's a case where we see European institutions, the European Central Bank, the Eurogroup, acting in the interests of creditors, trampling over human rights, squeezing every cent out of Greek society and people, simply in order to get a debt paid back, a debt they and we all know that cannot be paid back. That is the sad thing we have to observe. Now, one can raise the question, how has it come that far? How is this possible in Europe? And I think, and perhaps I'm not here entirely on the E2C line, but I personally think that the time has come to say openly that something is deeply wrong with the monetary union Europe constructed. I'll be very simple here, and I think there are two mistakes that have been made. One mistake is that we have Europeanized money, but we did not Europeanize national public debt. We Europeanized money, but public debt of the different member states have remained national. And so you have a very strange situation in which you have 19 sovereign debts. You have the debt of Spain, of France, of Italy, but you have only one European Central Bank. And that makes member states very vulnerable to the markets. It has taken the markets a long time to realize this. It has been quiet since from 2000, the beginning of monetary union, to 2010. But in 2010, with the first Greek crisis, it has dawned on markets that in the euro area, member states, the sovereign debt of member states is no longer backed by a central bank. And that they can organize a bond run, that they can speculate against the debt of Greece or Portugal now in this case, and so force member states on their knees. So we have monetary union, and we have very weak member states in the face of the markets. Now, in theory, you can correct this. In theory, the European Central Bank can buy the debt of individual member states and shield Spain or Greece or Portugal from the markets. But here we have the second mistake that has been made. And the second mistake is to make the European Central Bank not only an independent bank, but the most independent central bank of the whole world. If in the United States the Federal Reserve is acting, is implementing a policy which Congress of the United States does not agree with, then Congress can always change the law that is governing the Federal Reserve. Here in Europe, with the ECB, it's much more difficult, because if you want to change the statutes or the mandate or the way of working of the European Central Bank, you have to change the European Treaty. And that means having the consent of 28 member states. It's simply impossible, or at least very, very difficult. In any case, that means that the European Central Bank has an extraordinary independence and an extraordinary power. And we have seen how the ECB has been using that power in the euro crisis by saying to member states, okay, we will buy a little bit of your debt, we will support you a little bit against the markets, but in return, you cut public sector wages. In return, you freeze wages. In return, you decentralize collective bargaining. In return, you cut pensions. That is what the ECB has been doing. Now, I think this also explains a lot of developments over in Europe over the last years, because member states, they are with their shoulders against, with their backs against the wall. They're being attacked by the markets, and they want to be more credible in the eyes of the markets. They want to beg the ECB to buy something of their debt to shield them a little bit from the markets. And so what happens is that almost all member states in a couple of weeks' time decide to sign a fiscal compact with stupid rules, dangerous rules from an economic perspective. But if this is what they think the markets will believe, then they do it. And we're now having the same thing. Susan has mentioned this about Europe proposing, the 5 Presidents report proposing that Europe would start deciding and centralizing on wages. The competitiveness authorities, it is the same thing. wages, collective bargaining should no longer be governed by social partners at national level, but should be governed by experts. Why? Because this is more credible in the eyes of the markets, and this is what the ECB wants. So it's a bit cynical to observe that when we started the single currency, we got the promise from everywhere, from European policymakers, in saying, well, we can't, if we do the single currency, then we will protect ourselves better against the markets. We need one single European currency to stand up against global financial market pressure. And that was the idea 20 years or so long ago. And as I said, it's cynical to observe that with monetary union, the markets have become more powerful than ever, whereas member states have become more weaker than ever. Now, a word about political union, perhaps, because that is on everybody's minds. It's also how member states reacted, or some member states reacted to the Greek crisis and this shameful agreement by saying, well, what has happened to Greece illustrates that we need a political union, and then the idea is to have some kind of Euro area chamber inside the European Parliament. It's kind of general thinking, it's not clear thinking, but most probably the idea behind that is to say that we can, if you have this Euro chamber inside the European Parliament, in one way or the other, we can control the European Central Bank and the Eurogroup in some way. I am a bit skeptical about this, because what I fear will happen is the same thing that happened when we constructed monetary union. When we constructed monetary union, France and other member states were saying to Germany, we want a single currency, and Germany reacted by saying, okay, but on our terms. And then this whole independent central bank was created and so on. I fear the same thing will happen now. Germany, sooner or later, under pressure from France, Italy, will, one moment in time, say, okay, let's have political union, but on our terms. For us, a political union means a fiscal overlord, and why not, a wage overlord that decides on public spending, public deficits, wages. And yes, if you want a Euro chamber in the European Parliament, that fiscal overlord can go there twice a year and inform the European parliamentarians. So that's a bit my fear, that this talk about political union to complement monetary union, it's not clear, and we should be careful there, I think. Then what is the solution? Now Susan has talked about the long march through the institutions. Well, from the trade union point of view, social Europe is our long march through the institutions. So I'm advocating here the idea of social Europe, but at the same time, let me also be clear, I'm not talking about the social Europe we have now. I'm not only talking about minimalistic common European standards. What I'm talking about is a core of robust European labor rights and social rights and principles, a core of social standards that is able to keep the power of the European Central Bank and the Eurogroup within limits, under control. So that if coming years the ECB goes into a country and says this country is in crisis, we want to help you a little bit with our monetary policies, but in return you have to cut the minimum wage, that then a social machinery starts working, Court of Justice, commission, whatever, a social machinery saying and checking, is that kind of decision in line with our core of European social principles? If it is not, then it can't happen. Then the ECB does not have that power. Something like that already exists. It's called a wage safeguard clause, which we as ETUC managed to insert in some of the economic regulations, the famous six-pack of 2011. So economic regulations, again, trying to invade on the social sphere, where we said, okay, but when it comes to wages and collective bargaining, we want the principle clearly stated in that regulation that nothing in this regulation can invade, can breach the right to collective bargaining and the right to take industrial action. Until now, that safeguard clause has not been used, but I think that there will come a time that the Commission will try to use the economic regulations to invade in the social sphere of member states, and when that time comes, we can use that wage safeguard clause to say, no, you can't touch that. You can't touch collective bargaining. So, as said, a kind of example precedent exists. I think we in the ETUC and also outside the ETUC, in the forces of civil society, need to think more deeply and fastly on how to formulate similar clauses or principles. For example, the principle that every worker in Europe should have the right to a stable job, that he should not be able to fire a worker overnight, that every worker in Europe or the euro area should have the right to equal wage for equal work, that workers should have a right to decent wages, to social protection, and so on. As said, it's rather ambitious thinking. It's our long march through the institutions. A final reflection, maybe, since Felipe is not pounding his stick, a final reflection, I think, in the trade union movement, but also in the movement of NGOs, something we need to stop with is that we need to stop romanticizing about Europe. What I've observed in my career at the ETUC is that there are a lot of colleagues, as said, trade unions and civil society people, who are suffering from this idea that Europe, per definition, is a good thing. That if something promotes European integration, then we have to be in favor. I think this attitude, that reality has shown that this attitude, we can no longer afford this. We don't want to be against the European Union. We are still in favor of European integration, but each measure that Europe is proposing should be looked at its own merits. We should not automatically say it comes from Europe, so it must be a good thing. No, we should be saying it comes from Europe, it can be a good thing, but let's check it first, and if it's not a good thing, we are against. Thank you for your attention.
Ça marche. Un grand merci à Ronald et à
Thank you so much, Susan and Ronald, for your contributions. Well, I think that your presentations were quite complimentary because Susan decided to refer to the main speech of neoliberalism, and she did refer to the fact that the TTIP might be turned into a European campaign and help us to gain some success. And I think that Ronald put forward some alternatives on the table. He did raise the issue of the social Europe. He did refer to the need to decrease the weight of financial stakeholders who do contribute to deregulation. If you don't mind, I would like to raise two issues regarding both presentations. The first point has to do with the TTIP. I think that the example you gave us is quite interesting because there was a huge mobilization, but it does raise one particular point, and I would like to know, Susan, what you do think about that. I think that it is not to be taken for granted that there is a kind of convergence regarding the objectives of all the people who got mobilized around the TTIP. It is obvious that people wanted to sign the petition against the TTIP agreement. They were ready to demonstrate in the streets, but their objectives have been quite different, I think. Well, to a certain extent, we might wonder whether some of them were not in favor of a more protectionist approach against the others, and we felt, on the other hand, that some people were against this additional neoliberal agreement. And my point is the following. Do you believe that the actions carried out today, or the strategies carried out today, do require a convergence in terms of objectives, or do you believe that we might rally more people by organizing some action? So do you believe that all the actors, all the stakeholders have to be harmonized in terms of objectives to be pursued, or do you believe that it is through tangible actions that they might decide to rally to the same movement? The second point I would like to raise is related to Ronald's presentation. He did refer to the European Central Bank role. He did refer to the way the social Europe was supposed to be at the very core, or at the very basis of our main concerns. But don't you think that the power relations today are so strong, some economies are trying to prevail over other states? So at the end of the day, we do have states together trying to work together on an equal footing, but instead what we have is a kind of economic war or disputes or conflicts between different states, and some of them might take the lead at the level of the European Central Bank. And from an operational point of view, I would like to know which kind of power relation might take place, who should be involved or committed, because it seems that we have no prospect here. It might be difficult for us to determine where we could possibly act with a view to change these institutions.
Pardonnez-moi parce que moi je sais pas ce que.
I think your question is on the TTIP, whether the different actors that are against TTIP, whether they converge on the objectives or on the actions.
When I said everyone has something to hate in the TTIP, I didn't have time to expand. But if you are, for example, someone who is extremely preoccupied by climate change, as I am, and if you are going to the COP21, the TTIP is a tremendous obstacle to having a fair agreement on climate change, because the ISDS has very often given awards to companies that have wanted to drill for oil or frack or commit other ecological crimes, and it will continue to do so. And if states, for example, member states decided to pass laws which would say we have to leave 80% of all of the fossil fuels in the ground, then they would have so many lawsuits to defend themselves on that they would be broke at the end of those lawsuits. So That's one group of people who would find that they want to work against it. It's not just on the actions, it's on the end goal, which is to get rid of the thing. So you would have the ecologists, you would certainly have labor on the grounds that Ronald has mentioned. You have anyone who wants to have a decent diet for their families without genetically manipulated organisms and without hormone-fed beef and so on. And there are all kinds of, and particularly on the rules. How are the rules made? If the rules are made the way business wants them to be made, they will be made by business. Business will be present at every stage of the rule making. And another thing I was not able to mention is that when we're always hearing about rules from Mr. Schauble or Mr. Juncker or so on, but they're never talking about the principles of law. They don't talk about rights. They only talk about rules. And so the TTIP would remove a lot of rights from democratic rights that people have already gained. So I see no reason why the actions will be different, probably. I mean, people will imagine different things in different countries, and I hope that they will always be nonviolent. But I see no reason why we would not converge on the objectives as we have already done in a large measure. Does that answer your question? Because I'm not, with an echo in the microphone, I have trouble understanding. Excusez-moi, j'ai parfois des difficultés avec les échos dans le micro de comprendre.
Non, non, il n'y a pas, oui, donc c'est ça, c'était le fait que il semble que tu confirmes que...
Well, you seem to confirm the following. We all have something to hate about the TTIP, and it might create a movement, and through this type of mobilization, although we might rally people for different reasons or for different objectives, it doesn't matter, because we all have something to hate about the TTIP agreement. That's why we need really to move forward with what we do.
Non, mais du coup, peut-être que, enfin, je pense qu'on peut enchaîner sur la deuxième relance. Et Ronald, allez-y sur la.
Ronald, maybe you can move forward with your own comment, or the comment you were invited to make about the analysis and the fact that we need to include different elements.
Because the echo is so bad that you hardly hear what you are saying. But I did understand the question. So I indeed talked about creditors. I didn't mention countries, and I did so for a reason, because if you mention all of these problems in terms of countries, of member states, then very rapidly you get into a discussion about what member state is suffering from all this construction of monetary union, and what member state is benefiting from it. And it's clear, it's for all to see that Germany is benefiting a lot from all of this. They have lent a lot of money to other member states in the euro area. They are now insisting that they want to get their money back. At the same time, they are the favorites of the markets, so they have extremely low interest rates. And if there's one country where things are going actually rather well, it's Germany. So the danger is a little bit that you get into discussions about it's good for Germany and bad for the rest. But I think we need to try to avoid that kind of discussion, because if this situation at this moment is now good for Germany, sooner or later there will be a boomerang effect. If you have competitiveness authorities that start cutting wages in Spain, Italy, France, Belgium, sooner or later Germany will be next. So on the question of les rapports de force, how to convince Germany to change Europe and to go for a social Europe, I think sooner or later there will be a rapport de force where Germany also needs a different social Europe, and at that moment we can try to proceed in what I called this long march for social Europe.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Merci aux deux intervenants. On va rentrer. On va peut-être enchaîner tout de suite sur le deuxième.
Well, if you don't mind, we are going to start a second part of our conference. And I would like to invite the panelists, the speakers who took the floor right now to join the audience, because we have to welcome on stage 4 speakers.
Voilà, donc c'est une deuxième partie qui va être davantage consacrée.
This second part of the conference will be devoted to social movements. We will refer to different sectors, different leaders, and we will try to see what kind of lessons they have drawn out of all that and what kind of strategy they do suggest for the future. So normally we should have 4 people on stage. I would like to invite those people to join us on stage, and then we will give the floor to the audience on a more spontaneous basis, so that we will trigger off the whole debate. And you can sit wherever you want, of course.
Donc,
well, very, very briefly, we are supposed to listen to 4 different speakers, and we'll refer to specific actions which have been carried out. It is important to determine how the action was carried out and what kind of power relation did emerge out of that, and what were the deliverables to a certain extent. And then it is important to refer to the fact that a sectoral action is likely to impact on more global issues or on austerity in particular. And we will refer to transport, to the milk sector, we will refer to undocumented people and migrants, and we will also refer to financial issues. So Eduardo Chagas, who is the Secretary General of the European Transport Workers Federation, to be the first to start, if he doesn't mind. I'd like to give him the floor. He's supposed to talk about the fight against liberalization and austerity in the field of transport, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you so much, Eduardo. Does it work? Yes, it seems it does work. And I would like to speak English, if you don't mind. But I feel much more comfortable because I'm used to the jargon in English, and I feel it is better for me to speak English.
For your patience listening to me in English. The European Transport Workers Federation is an organization that represents trade unions in all transport modes in Europe. You will think of us when the STIB will on strike again some of these days. And you can imagine that managing 41 European different cultures of doing trade unionism and fighting for the workers' rights is not an easy task. And this has been the main challenge. I'm a General Secretary since 2005 in the ETF, and it has been precisely the big challenge is to make the Federation effective, taking into account that we have Russian unions, we have Norwegian unions, Portuguese, Spanish, Cyprus, you name it. 41 in Europe, it's something completely, or something complicated. Key to our work has been, first of all, an exhaustive sharing of information, and our affiliates permanently complain of the loads of emails and texts and proposals and questions we raise to them. Investing heavily in capacity building, of our members and in taking informed collective decisions. And this, when you have to wait for the reaction from all the members, or at least from a majority, it takes time and it doesn't play in favor of efficiency. It is also important that trade unions, of course, they have to defend the members they represent, but they have an important societal role. I have been confronted often with colleagues from the trade union movement saying, well, I have to defend my members, not to organize precarious workers, not to defend climate change, not to get involved in TTIP discussions. Well, the ETF doesn't believe this is the right response, and we have been quite active in climate change discussions, in particular because transport has a key role in and a great impact on climate, and we understand that we have to be active players in reducing the impact transport is in transport. We have been quite active in the discussion on sustainable development and making sure that sustainability is not only environmental sustainability, it also has to involve social sustainability. And more directly to the core of our problems in the transport sector, the issue of fair working conditions. And I will come back to that. But also the issue of trade agreements, as I mentioned, the ETF has a clear position on TTIP, which was adopted unanimously. An important issue that we have always kept present is, I didn't note this, but it always comes to my mind, is the issue of financial independence. And it is good always to observe that the transport trade unions depend exclusively on money from transport workers. And a little bit linked with that, the avoidance of the seduction to be invited to the big table where decisions are taken. And we want to be there, but we have to resist the temptation of feeling that we are part of the decisions just because we sit there. And we know quite well that being part of 7 European social dialogue committees in the different transport sectors, we are celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the sectoral social dialogue in road transport, which was created in '65, and we have not adopted up to today one single binding agreement in social dialogue. And we keep saying that social dialogue cannot be just the opportunity for our members to come to Brussels and have nice beers and bring chocolates to their families. We have more important things to do than just pretending that we are meeting the employers to negotiate. And this is, believe me, a big challenge because, again, the different trade union cultures make us explain very well why this has to bring more added value to our work. We have been involved, it has been mentioned, in few victories. Some of them were really important, and in particular those we got in the fights against liberalization in railways, in ports, in airports, but unfortunately the victories are much smaller than the losses. Still, we keep campaigning, and we are currently involved in a campaign against social dumping in maritime transport, in road, in aviation, in urban public transport. And again, the long process of decision-making has made that when we talk about social dumping, our Eastern European affiliates understand that this is not a campaign against them. This is a campaign against social dumping practices which abuse of their rights. We have a unanimous position against TTIP, which has also been adopted with the support of the Nordic trade unions. Our president is from Sweden, and he was one of the biggest supporters of the decision because we involved heavily in this discussion. And since the man with the hammer is already ready to knock again, I must conclude with a request to you all. The ETF is launching or is sponsoring a European Citizens Initiative. You have heard about the European Citizens Initiative on the right to water. We are launching a European initiative which is called Fair Transport Europe, and we need your support. This aims at pushing the Commission to take action and to stop the irregular practices, illegal practices, or abusive practices that abuse on workers' rights in the transport sector. But we believe that some of the measures that have to be taken will benefit also workers in all sectors and the society in general. It is just one more tool that we are using. We know that in the end the Commission may even say, thank you very much, but we do nothing. But it is important that we reach these 1 million signatures within 1 year, and for that I invite you to visit www.fairtransporteurope.eu and to sign and to pass the message to your friends and networks. Thank you for your attention.
Eduardo, merci. Peut-être qu'on pourrait suggérer de passer
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Maybe we can deal with the milk issue with the European Milk Board representative. I don't know whether we can invite. Well, good evening. My name is Erwin Schupkes. I'm a milk farmer here in Belgium. I have 100 cows, and I'm a member of the board of the European Milk Board, which does gather today 16 countries. So we are all part of the same organization. Well, thank you very much for inviting a farmer. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an academic. I'm a peasant. I work on my land every day. Thank you. Well, you have to know that the EU decided to liberalize the milk market. Well, what does it mean, to be clear? Well, we can produce as much milk as we want. There is no limitation in the field of milk production all over Europe. Well, what does it mean? Well, it does mean that the production increased by 2% all over Europe. But at the same time, we did lose markets. In Russia, for example, with the Russian embargo, 1.5% of the milk of the European milk, which was supposed to go there, well, this market disappeared, so we have no more opportunity to sell our milk over there. And we are supposed, of course, to turn to China. And China does only buy milk powder. And at the European level, people drink less milk or use less milk, 0.5% more or less, so it's a decrease by 0.5%. It means that we lost 2% in terms of market share, and at the same time we had an increase by 2% at the level of the production, which means that the situation is completely unbalanced. And what does it mean? It does mean that the price of milk decreases. And with a view to produce 1 liter of milk, we do not even get 30 cents. Today we get 28 cents with a view to produce 1 liter of milk. So you need a cow, you need some land, you need some material. And I don't even get 30 cents for my milk production. And I need to pay 44 cents with a view to produce my milk. And if I decide not to get a wage, I would need 33 cents with a view to produce my milk. So I'm losing money today. That's the way it is. I'm losing money every day. And I wonder who is ready in this audience to work years or months without getting any wage? Who is ready not to be paid to do his or her job? And we are supposed at the same time to produce food. We are supposed to produce food, and we do not even get a wage for that. So, in Europe, the farmers are meant to disappear, I think. Our farms are disappearing because we have 500 cows or 1,000 cows, but most of the time the farmers are not there anymore. Most of the time, big companies or big industries or big investors do have these farms, or they become the property of banks. And I don't think it is the type of agriculture we want. That's not the kind of thing we want for us. In Belgium or in Europe, we need to determine what kind of raw material we still have, we still use. What is the raw material we have? Well, we still have some wood, we have cows, we have meat, we have pork, we have milk. What else do we have? Well, that's the raw material we have at our disposal. And that's what we need in Europe. That's really critical for Europe to have this type of raw material. But if the raw material is in the hands of multinational companies, investors, banks, etc., it will be up to them to decide everything. They will have all the power on us.
Nous voulons produire de la bonne qualité, nous voulons produire de la bonne nourriture pour vous. Aujourd'hui, on est encore capable, mais qu'est-ce qu'on veut manger? Qu'est-ce qu'on va manger dans l'avenir? Uniquement de la nourriture industrielle, dont on ne sait pas d'où elle vient. Si le TTIP va se créer, on va recevoir la viande, la nourriture de l'Amérique. Et c'est pas ça qu'on veut. Nous autres, au niveau de l'OMB, qu'est-ce qu'on veut? Une régulation de la production européenne, c'est clair. On a consulté les députés, la Commission européenne, les ministres européens, et aujourd'hui ils disent, voilà, on n'en veut rien savoir. Et je crois qu'aujourd'hui ils disent, l'Europe dit, voilà, on doit chercher des nouveaux marchés. Où sont les nouveaux marchés? C'est l'Afrique. Toute la surproduction aujourd'hui qu'on fait aujourd'hui, on veut l'envoyer en dumping vers les pays africains. On veut détruire les petites exploitations agricoles qui sont en train de se construire aujourd'hui. Et nous autres, on amène notre lait en poudre produit ici en Europe. Nous autres, on ne sait pas vivre et en même temps, on détruit la production, le développement de ces pays, de ces agriculteurs qui veulent nourrir leur pays. Le commissaire Hogan,
Commissioner Hogan and President Juncker doesn't know how to manage a crisis. He would like to manage crises with money, but it's impossible to do that. What you need is structural measures, and farmers don't want bonuses or subsidies. We want to make a living with our job. We want to work for good quality. For us, what is key is to build an alliance between farmers and citizens. All alone, by ourselves, we won't be able to change the world, but all together, we stand one chance. And our slogan is, when injustice becomes a right, resistance becomes a duty.
Merci beaucoup
Thank you very much for your input, Owen. And without further ado, I give the floor to Corina. Can you listen to the translation, Corina? Yes? So you are the coordinator of Blockupy, one of the coordinators of Blockupy. Yesterday, we built kind of a chain around the European institutions building, and I think that in Blockupy you did the same in Germany. It was really a nice action to see. So could you please tell us what is your perspective from Blockupy? How do you see us establishing links and creating some convergence?
Thank you much, first of all, for the invitation to Blockupy to speak here. I think it's a real honor for us to be here in this session on how movements can fight against austerity. I'm just coming back from a Blockupy International meeting we had in the afternoon for 5 hours with 50 to 60 participants, activists from networks, organizations, movements from different corners of Europe. Activists committed to keep the struggle going against austerity and the austerity regime, against the power bloc that became most visible and articulate on July 13th. Activists also committed against fighting the border regime that tries to stop refugees and migrants from entering the EU, Europe, and individual countries, and from moving around in Europe. I'm not going to tell much about Blockupy because most of you know about Blockupy and have been in Frankfurt, but just to say a couple of words. Blockupy and Blockupy International has worked for the past years to create a transnational European-wide mobilization and space of praxis against the EU crisis regime, against the European-wide imposition of austerity politics, as well against the deep anti-democratic character of the EU in crisis. In these years, Blockupy could evolve as one space for connecting various struggles and political actors, subjectivities and localities for a struggle for Europe from below. We organized meaningful European-wide days of action, but more importantly, and I think that's also your question, more importantly, we brought these struggles into the heart of the beast, so to say, heart of the European crisis regime and financial power, to the ECB and the financial district of Frankfurt. We connected strategies of broad alliance building and confrontation, a praxis with larger political orientation, and linked European-wide transnational dynamics with the local and the uneven. I think this year was actually a very rich years of experiences, and we probably learned at least 3 lessons. One lesson, coming back to Blockupy and March 18th, the highlight of our campaign, we learned there can be, if it's organized with political targets and etc., there can be large, strong, common, transnational anti-austerity mobilizations taking Europe as a terrain of struggle. And I say Europe and not the EU. Of course, EU is part of Europe, but I think what is important is the mobilization character, the targeting, and taking Europe as a terrain of struggles, based and rooted in local territorial practices. This is also important. We also learned, I think, from Syriza and the Greek struggles that the crisis, which had been administered already to the local level again and has been seen as a local, the Greek problem, that the crisis can be pushed back to the European level, even if the results were awful and resulted in a lot of depression, all of that, but for half a year, this move of Syriza and the Greek people who struggled against austerity and for a different resolution pushed us also all on the European level. So this is also a lesson we learned. But we also learned a very bad lesson, that there is a power bloc committed to not allowing anything outside of their scope and to dominating anything. And that, of course, is ruled, not of course, but it is ruled partially not by itself, but the German government. We as Blockupy know of our responsibility to keep going the struggle, to work against, as one comrade from Greece in our meeting in the afternoon said, against this Europeanization of TINA, there is no alternative, and against the depression and against this kind of domination. We keep going where we know of our responsibility as Blockupy to confront the power bloc and to create moments that make visible the oppositional bloc, visible some disturbances in institutional routines and practices, such as blocking an ECB opening. I cannot give you the very nice message that we have found the right campaign now after March 18th, how to go on, and after the July 13th, but we are committed to build another and the next campaign and building from the Blockupy strengths of these last years. We're dedicated to use the strengths of Blockupy mobilizations to build the next mobilizations and build that around targeting or confronting symbols of the European power bloc that had been the ECB, that is now Brussels. That's why we also called for Brussels and for civil disobedience in Brussels, and that might be, as a next step, Berlin. But that needs to have some more thoughts and some more time. But Berlin is clearly one center of power, but there are many more centers of power in Berlin and there in Europe, and there are different places of power in Berlin. We will also build mobilization that allows to gear towards the target or gear towards a target or goal, but also to build the space that connects the targeting with regional thematic struggles taking place all over Europe. And what I think is very important for us is also to say Blockupy has some coordination group, but if we want to have another Blockupy International, Blockupy Frankfurt, a Blockupy Berlin, a Blockupy Brussels happening, we need, we all know it's the work of all of us, so we need all of you and we need all of us not to only think through going through the institutions, but building oppositional practices, building oppositional blocks on the streets, doing, confronting the power blocks and going a step forward. Thank you.
Merci Corina.
Thank you very much, Corina. And the last speech is from Aboubakar Soumahoro. He will be referring to a key issue in the last months. Mobility at international level, undocumented people and refugees. Dear friends, and for all those who have never heard about the International Coalition of the Undocumented and Migrants, so we are a coalition gathering all that has been described, stigmatized by the border control policies towards human beings called migrants. When people leave Africa or when they leave Asia, they're called migrants.
Donc, de surcroît, des personnes dangereuses.
They are considered as dangerous people.
Et quand, à l'inverse, les voyageurs partent,
when on the contrary, people leave Germany, France, Spain, Greece, and so on, Switzerland, towards Asian or African countries, they are expatriates. As a consequence, we've chosen this name International Coalition of the Undocumented and of Migrants. We have developed grassroots level actions. We fought in the different countries. I will refer to the European March from 2012. We crossed 8 borders without showing any residence permit. Our basic principle was that if goods cross borders, human beings must be able to cross borders as well. So that's what we stand for as a coalition.
Donc du coup, je ne vais pas faire ici, et je n'aimerais pas faire ici un discours caritatif.
I don't want to develop a charity-based speech or some rhetorical speech, because
qui a transformé et brisé le rêve
any alternative to the system that crushed the dream of a whole generation of people goes through the understanding of the system itself. We need to understand the nature, the soul, the culture of the current European Union. And we'll be able to do that by analyzing migration flows that have already, more than 23,000 people died in these migration flows, only in the Mediterranean area. These lives lost can be considered as a tragedy. It's more than that. It's a crime because of Frontex. Frontex, that is a mechanism developed in 2005 with a total budget of 114 million euros in 2015. Aimé Césaire said in his speech on colonization, and I quote, "A civilization that can't solve the problems derived from its functioning is a decaying civilization. A civilization who decides not to see these crucial issues is a ruined civilization." Dear friends, if we don't structurally analyze the situation, the migration flows, we won't be able to find the root reasons of the suffering of people because of the measures they have to endure because of the European Union and its austerity measures. Austerity imposed by the ECB, but also the IMF. And if we don't develop a structural analysis, it will be impossible for us to understand what the media and the policies imposed us. Indeed, they make a difference between refugees and economic migrants. They dehumanize migrants and they outsource asylum seeking outside European borders. Now economic migrants are considered as waste, and it led to kind of a migrants hunting phenomenon. Let's take an example. Today we have a continent like Africa that produces 4.5% of global growth, and 1% is produced by the EU. And the African continent also encompasses 50%, 70% of poor people all over the world. And this is a crime. Death in the Mediterranean Sea is a crime perpetrated by the EU, by the ECB and the IMF. The suffering of the Greek people, of the youth, poverty and homelessness derive from the same policies that were imposed to African and Asian countries. They've been imposed for centuries, and we can't accept and approve of these policies because they are criminal. Let's take Thomas Sankara or Nelson Mandela. We're just telling you, and I would like to make a proposal to conclude my contribution. Do you think that the current European Union can be changed? We, in the coalition, and when we see what happened in Greece, where there was an economic and political coup, we think that such an institution can't be changed. We need to develop an alternative path. We need convergence in our fights and struggles, and that's why we invite you all to develop a boycott, because the EU is going to deport more than 400,000 migrants, and air companies will do that. So we invite you to develop such a boycott campaign. We need to write down names and say that the fight of migrants and of social movements can only be done thanks to solidarity, convergence of struggle for free movement, social justice. But we also need to highlight that we are aware and nothing can stop us.
Pour poursuivre un peu dans l'élan que donne
follow on Aboubakar's tone, I will ask to the three speakers if they agree to express one sentence that would be a step towards convergence and a step towards an alternative. Do you have one specific sentence, one specific proposal? Could you suggest an alternative or a way to create that convergence? Before I give the floor to the audience, could you please do that?
Understand the question. Je viens à peine de finir. I mean, I understand it, but I don't know.
On a un peu de problème à comprendre.
On revient là-dessus par après.
So we'll come back to that later. There are four brief inputs that were asked before the debate. So I will ask Pedro to make his contribution first. He is the representative of Euromarches. I thank you very much. And as there is translation from Spanish, I will speak Spanish.
Bueno, muy breve. Yo creo
I will be brief.
Y desde otros países, pero en particularmente desde mi país, yo creo que se ha demostrado una capacidad.
It seems to me that we have demonstrated that we have an ability to fight thanks to the Indignados movement. we've also shown that we can resist to the privatization trend and to the austerity policies. We organized white waves, then a green wave concerning privatization of education and vulnerability of public education, and there was also a blue wave against privatization of water. And these movements were efficient because we've been able to stop austerity policies in Spain. It's a reality. We did that. And now we're going through a phase, a new phase, when we think that we could maybe fight against some political instances and bodies. We can do that in big capital cities, or big cities in Spain are now ruled by people who were part of these movements. And this is considerably changing the way you understand policies and the way you develop them. And they are doing so in a democratic process, and they broaden citizens' participation in politics. So this is not just the outcome of the action by one single political party. There are several movements, and Greece was the first to disobey to the new powers of the financial elites. And we think, and we've discovered that it's difficult, it's not impossible, but we've realized that from a political point of view, it's really difficult to fight in one single country against these big powers. And we've seen in Spain that it's necessary to pull our capacities together. We need to fight together, to develop proposals together, and Euro marches have a slogan, Oggi basta, enough. So enough is enough. But we also need to start our work. We need to rebuild Europe, because the one we have, we don't want it. So we need to build a new democracy, a new Europe from the movements. And we need power to do that. We need political capacity, as in Greece, as in Spain. Why couldn't we do the same in Germany and in other countries? But we have no articulated political power to do that. So it's a challenge that we need to meet as movements. I can't continue to fight against privatization of water in one city, knowing that in the next city water is being privatized or it's being imposed by Troika. And as a consequence, we need to get united. And I conclude, we've not yet finalized our proposal, but maybe Euro marches 2015 should not be the end. There should be a starting point in a long-term process. We need to repeat that experience so that we can develop new proposals. Mary Dominic from Attac, Germany. Suggested that we could organize green, blue waves and movements in Europe. And we'll do that. We'll continue these waves at local and regional level. So we need to spread our actions. We need to develop a dialogue with people in France, in Greece, and so on. And that's what we intend to do next year. And Mary Dominic from Attac, Germany, told me these are the demands we would like to submit to Europe. So we need to resist, but also develop proposals. So we've started a process, and we hope to be able to discuss this process with all the movements, with the trade unions who are fighting for change. And next year, we will come back even more strongly convinced and with more proposals. Thank you very much. Thank you, and we now give the floor to Yorgos Vassalos, who is spokesperson of the Solidarity Initiative Greece Resisting. So Yorgos, we are late, so could you please be very brief? Yes, thank you very much. Dear friends, Syriza was elected last January, and its government created a new hope in Greece and in Europe, an alternative, a political alternative, and other European people have shown their solidarity to the Greek people. They were asking the Greek people to resist the blackmailing process, and the Greek people ignored the banks being closed, and they said Oshi on the occasion of the July referendum. And this is why the coup happening on 13th of July was even tougher. And because of that, we had to reposition ourselves and draw the necessary lessons of that experience. And as we speak, the Greek parliament is voting on new measures. The third austerity plan will bring new cuts in the pensions, last resort pensions of all people who have no other income, and it will affect 30,000 people. Thousands of people will get a pension below the poverty threshold. There will also be an important increase in VAT and transport fees, and this will hit even further Greek people who have difficulties in making ends meet. And there are also some newspapers that are sold to foreign investors. Some harbors are also being sold. The public sector can't control the banking sector more as against what was promised by the governments. And it's the Troika and the foreign investors who control more. There is no margin of maneuver in the government to develop a parallel plan, an alternative plan. In the Memorandum of Understanding, it reads that any project, any law must be ratified by Troika. There is more than 1 million unemployed people who don't get any allowance. People or children receive bad food at schools. Nothing has changed in Europe, and everything will worsen because of the third memorandum. We are against that, and we in Belgium organize actions against the austerity measures. And here we are supported by the Belgian movement. You've supported us in a remarkable way. And the same was done by all the anti-austerity movements in Europe. So what are we going to do now? Shall we do something different? And why something different? Some movements in Greece are recovering. And last week there was a demonstration against privatization of the Piraeus harbor, but also against the privatization of airports. And there was also, there will be a general strike early November against the third memorandum. Dear friends, we can't, we must choose between the anti-austerity and people who are in favor of austerity. We need to choose. Some people people would say that the Syriza government had no choice. But some people from the government said that they think that the measures are unfair, and the leftist forces can't stick to the TINA approach. The debt is not legitimate, but the Greek government has kind of given up. And there are still many instruments that have not been used at European level. And at European level, the win-win strategy has failed. It has always been difficult to find arguments to convince European partners that austerity doesn't work, because austerity works for big businesses. On 13th of July, there was a coup, masks fallen, and it's not enough to observe that. We need to draw practical lessons. We now have evidence that we can't reform the European institutions, and it's impossible to conduct a progressive alternative policy, even if it is a moderate one. And in such circumstances, getting out of the Eurozone is the only way. It can no longer be a taboo for leftist forces in Europe. We can't leave Europe and the current trends to the far right. And some people say that there are just some breaks and holes in the European building. It's not true, because these barbarous policies are having some consequences that can be overturned, and our duty is to support the responses of all the movements in Europe. We want to get rid of austerity. We want to name and shame those who are in favor of austerity, because of that austerity and because of these forces, some sovereign states become kind of submissive states. Thank you. They are colonized. Thank you very much.
Well, I think that normally we were supposed to give the floor to Pascal Sabido. Pascal, and you're supposed to talk about COP21. I hope I was properly informed. And I would like to speak English, if you don't mind.
So, about convergence of European struggles, global struggles, I just came from a meeting on how to coordinate trade, climate, agricultural struggles. So we're on the right track at least. I'm going to try and talk about COP21. How many people, put your hand up if you know what COP21 is, if you've heard of COP21. Fair few people. Keep your hand up if you're going to be in Paris on the streets during the COP. So I've got 3 minutes to convince the rest of you and show why it's important for our struggle. COP21 is going to be, I'm not going to swear, a disaster. It's a corporate takeover by the same neoliberal beasts who have imposed austerity, who are driving TTIP, who are behind the migration policies, and who are destroying Europe. We know this already, so we shouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately, now we're seeing those same neoliberal multinational corporations not just trashing our communities and the climate, but now they're being told that they are the saviours and are going to stop climate change themselves by introducing more markets, more privatisation, more power away from the people. So we need to mobilise for COP21 in Paris. Not for the climate, although the climate's pretty fucked, if we're honest, but actually we need to mobilise in Paris because what it means to actually tackle climate change, what it means to the system. Tackling climate change is about ending neoliberalism. It's about challenging and overturning capitalism. If we're serious, leaving 80% of fossil fuels in the ground means overturning the power of the fossil fuel industry. It means stopping the banking industry investing where it wants, taking it back into public hands. It means public housing for everybody, public transport, as our friends here would want us to have. All of these things are not going to be delivered by the market, ever. So this is a huge, huge threat. This is about the society we want and the people we want to create it with. So we know the Paris deal. What comes out on the 12th of December or 11th of December when they hit their hammer and say, we've signed a great deal, look at us, we've done a great job. We know it's going to be a disaster, a climate disaster, a social disaster for workers, for citizens, for migrants, for everyone across the world. But it's also our moment to say, we are not accepting this. We are not going to sit back as you sign a deal in our name. This is not in our name. This is not in the name of us or our children. This is a moment for us as movements to come together and realize this is not about the climate, this is about the economy, this is about the system we live in and who has power. So we don't just reject a deal that comes out of Paris. We reject the whole notion that laws are being written by big businesses who have our governments in their pockets. That we reject that this is about being in the streets of Paris on the 12th of December. It's not just about saying, please don't do this. It's about taking action. It's about taking a step beyond just marching, about saying we are going to disrupt things like we did yesterday in the streets. First of all, massive applause for everybody who was out yesterday in the streets. On the 12th of December in Paris, once the deadly deal is signed, it's going to be about a chance for us also to build our movements, to come together and think, Paris is not an end game in itself, this deal is going to be crap. What do we do as a response? How do we build together and build our movement? How do we make sure that we bring in those fighting against TTIP? Make sure those fighting austerity, fighting Europe's deadly migration policies, corporate power, make sure we're all included. And so that when the 12 happens and that hammer goes, we say if our leaders are not going to do it, we are going to do it ourselves. And in 2016, we are going to take down the multinationals who are deciding our laws. We're going to occupy the mines, we're going to occupy the fracking sites, take down the mille vaches farms, industrial farming. We're going to do it ourselves, and we're going to build the alternatives, because we've got them amongst all of us here. If we work together and see the future together, we can do it. So I will see you in the streets of Paris.
Voilà, et la dernière intervention de la série.
The very last contribution we are supposed to listen, because at 9:30 we will have to stop and listen to the elected representatives. And I would like to listen to Jérémy. I would like to invite Jérémy to join us here on stage. Well, yesterday when we got out of jail, we were welcomed by Belgian citizens and by Spanish citizens, and I would like to thank all of them because they sent us a lot of positive energy from Gibraltar. So I'd like to thank them for what they did for us.
Merci à elle et à eux.
Thank you so much to each and every one of them. I would like to talk about one conference which took place during the whole day today, and which is part of these 3 days of mobilization. It was organized by Attac Europe. It was a meeting organized about the debt. 6 countries were represented by citizens which did organize campaigns. Mr. Constantopoulou from Greece and another member of the parliament from Spain, Mr. Urban, was also attending this conference. So if you don't mind, I would like to sum up a bit what we discussed during that conference. And first of all, I would like to insist upon the fact that the debt is not only a transfer of wealth between the population and creditors. 20% of the budget in Belgium, 45 million euros a year, but it is mainly a tool for blackmailing people. It is not the kind of tool we can agree with. And then, on top of what we discussed during this conference, we do insist upon the fact that we are not willing to fight on principles, but what we want to do is to have a citizen approach, because the theme as such is not so important, but we need to act. We need to act as citizens. We need to check the bill. We need to check what they do with the taxes we pay, because when we get a bill, we check it to see it is right, and we need to control public accounts. We need to control public companies, and we need to bear in mind the fact that we are there with a view to scrutinize all the expenses which are likely to be made, and that's precisely why many social movements decided to take care of that. They understood it was something quite related to their fight, and the Marea Verde, the green wave, is of course something which is fully related to that. We are not ready to pay for that particular debt. And on the occasion of the conference we did organize today, we insisted upon the fact that it was not a matter of topic or themes, and we are not supposed to define a priority order, but we want to act against the system as a whole, and we want to act bearing in mind the right measures to be adopted. Although we have a lack of time, although we do not have always enough stamina with a view to do at home what we want to do, we know that our networks are quite useful, because we can share our practice and success stories, and we also have on the top of that the opportunity to get coordinated and do things together. In the framework of this conference, the ICON network is a citizens network in charge of the debt, but other networks are also mobilized because they want to gain more power at the level of citizens. I would like to conclude by insisting upon the fact that we cannot rely on the national government for all the alternatives we want to promote. The social movement we do organize is meant to stop austerity, and the alternatives will emerge out of the fight, out of the war we are ready to wage.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the 8 speakers who have taken the floor, and now I would like to invite once again the speakers on stage to join the audience, to join the room, with a view to invite the next speakers to join us. The next 3 are actually elected representatives, so we'll give the floor to 2 members of the parliament and 2 regional councillors. We will have 2 Spanish citizens. Philippe Lamberts is there. Marina Albiol is also there. Pablo Echenique is also in the audience. So we have 2 Spanish representatives and 1 Belgian MEP. And I believe it is quite interesting to listen to what they have to tell us about this issue.
Peut-être. Est-ce que je me demande s'il y a un impératif ou pas du tout? Il y a la traduction, c'est bon. Bonsoir. Donc, du coup,
well, good evening.
Alors, j'ai cru comprendre,
well,
vous aviez un
Pablo,
impératif à un moment.
I think that you have to another commitment, if I'm not mistaken.
Ok, donc ça va. On a un peu de...
So we have enough time.
Alors,
is it?
Peut-être qu'on va commencer avec vous.
Okay, fine. Maybe we can start with Marina Albiol. You're a member of the European Parliament. You do represent Izquierda Unida in Spain. And I would like to know what kind of alternatives you can offer in terms of austerity at the level of the European Parliament. And maybe a second point, what was the purpose, what was the use of the European Parliament during the crisis, during the negotiations with Greece, for example, from your point of view?
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Y en primer lugar,
well, good evening. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, because I believe that today we have the opportunity to start a very interesting debate, a debate which is key for the future of European citizens. And I would like to seize this opportunity with a view to convey warm greetings to all the comrades who did get to Brussels with a view to attend this 2015 this 2015 conference. What about austerity policies? More than 17% of the population of the EU for the time being is likely to be excluded from a social point of view. 12% of citizens are faced with what we call energy poverty, and it is with no doubt the outcome of this austerity policy which has been carried out. But because of austerity in 2014, the benefits of big European companies or businesses did increase by 9%, and the financial sector had the opportunity at the same time to increase its profits by more than 20%. So austerity is imposed upon the population, but a minority is likely to get richer and richer. So for years we have been talking about austerity policies. It is a kind of jargon we do use, but we need to bear in mind the fact that these policies have been implemented by the governments of the EU member states, and these policies have been imposed upon us by the IMF or by the European Central Bank. And all of this has taken place because some governments decided to respect what they were asked to do. It is the case of Mr. Zapatero, because he was invited by the European Central Bank to take a series of measures, and these measures have been carried on by Mr. Rajoy, which means that at the end of the day we had to experience cuts in different fields, retirement, pension schemes, etc. But we can wonder why austerity has led to this type of outcome or result, because we have more and more wealthy people. In Spain, for example, we have 40 people who are much more rich than they were before the crisis. So we have 5 million people unemployed, but we have 50,900 people who are now part of this closed circle of people who have more than $1 billion of investments. Well, I think that there is always values and ideas related to this type of approach. And when we talk about austerity, at the end of the day, what we mean is a massive transfer of social resources which are taken out of public services with a view to be given to private capital. And because of austerity, we have this type of massive transfer between the workers and the income of workers and the richer part of the population. So we have rich people, and the more rich people we have, the more poor people we have, because the two are fully related. So I think that it is a shift, at the level of the capitalist system. It is a perverted effect, I would say, of the system. And in the past, we have already seen that such policies were likely to promote the capitalist approach. And to maintain profits, it is important to exploit more and more the workers, the natural resources, etc. And that's precisely why they decided to create some spaces of negotiation, and this has led to the privatization of public services. Well, we have on top of that the TTIP agreement. What is it? Well, actually, new standards. It is full of new standards which are likely to make it possible to get rid of social progress. And because of that, the standards which will prevail will make it possible for people, for a very small group of the population, to increase its benefits and to exploit more and more the resources we do have at the level of our respective countries. It is obvious that we have some people who did benefit from these policies. We have an Oxfam report which was issued in September, by the way, and in this report it does appear that poverty levels all over Europe are quite important. We have 123 million European citizens who are in poverty, and at the same time this continent is a place where we have a great deal of people who are quite wealthy. So poverty is not a matter of scarcity, austerity, but it is a matter of dissemination of resources, and we can say that austerity led us to this crisis situation. I think that on top of that, we could possibly refer to an alternative in the framework of the capitalist system. We could, for example, promote a more human type of system, or we could possibly talk about other dimensions. But that's a dream, you know, that's a dream which might be impossible at the end of the day. And today, because of the crisis, there is a lack of capacity of the system to promote the well-being of a great majority of us. And this is, of course, done at the expense of the poorest of our society. So I think that all the changes which have to be made have to be related to this particular system, which is quite cruel and which is not human at all. We cannot move forward along these lines, and our job today is to build a brand new system. However, I think that at the level of the left, or the left-wing parties, it is sometimes difficult to use the right names or to provide a genuine future to workers or to the working class, because we have no opportunity to guarantee dignity for a majority of us. And regarding austerity policies, we need to better understand what they mean. We need to defend the alternative, and we need to promote a socialist approach. I think that we have to use our resources, we have to use the different sectors of the economy. We need to take over these different sectors, because if we manage to control communication, banks, etc., it might change the situation. Otherwise, the situation will remain identical to the one we have right now. So if we focus on strategic sectors, if we manage to control the whole of it from a democratic point of view, we will make it possible for people to have access to health, education, social protection, and to get some support in the case, for example, of people who have special needs, for example. And I would like to conclude. I would like to conclude by stating the following. The time allotted to me, unfortunately, is over. But in some states, and it is the case in Spain, we do believe it is possible. We can do something about that if we manage, for example, to sign a memorandum about the debt, and if we do have a noted system on top of all that. The very last point I would like to raise has to do with the following. If it is possible in the framework of the European Union, we might wonder what kind of policy will emerge out of that. Because of Greece, we know that there is no alternative with the EU, because the EU was built on the basis of the rules of the game of those who have the power. So there is no future for European peoples with this type of treaty, with the single currency, with the TTIP, with the existing borders. But of course, the only alternative is not at the level of the state or the nation state. I think that the alternative is at the world level. We live in a world economy, and for the left-wing parties, we will have to set up a new European Union with new rules of the game. And this crisis is an opportunity for us. It is a challenge. It is an opportunity we have to build this new Europe. With a view to do that, we need a program or an agenda which might help us to answer the social needs of our citizens, and we also need a political organization which will make it possible for people to voice their expectations or to determine what they want to get at the end of the day, and that's precisely why we are here today.
Voilà.
Thank you very much for this first contribution, and without further ado, we move on to Pablo Echenique. You were an MEP as well from the Podemos party in Brussels and in Strasbourg. You were elected in May 2015. You were elected municipal councillor in Aragon. So it's interesting to listen to your point of view. What about the institutions at Brussels level and at local level? How can they serve the convergence we are all calling? What is your perspective on that? Good evening to all the French speakers, but I will speak of Spanish because my French is too poor. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for coming. I will do some weird things. First of all, I will answer to the question raised in this debate. The headline question. Some people who help me to communicate tell me that I have to avoid answering the questions, and sometimes they are right. The better option is not to answer. But I'm used to answering the questions, so I will answer the headline question: is it possible to fight against the austerity policies? The answer is quite complicated. How can European social movements develop a way out of austerity? So it's true that it's not easy. I think that the answer is no. On the other hand, when it comes to politics in the broadest sense, that's to say managing common good in a society, can politics succeed? I think that the answer is yes. And this is the core element of what we're experiencing today. Let me give you an example. Of a policy conducted in the city of Madrid. Madrid, that is the biggest city in Spain, more than 3 million inhabitants. This is the Greater Madrid area. And today, the power is in the hands of decent people. It's unprecedented in the history of the city of Madrid, or at least in the recent history of the city. The budget of the municipality of Madrid is of more than 4 billion euros. And now the municipality can better work for common good because the power is in the hands of decent people who have to manage 4 billion euros. This is incredible. This is great. And as a consequence, I think that at a meeting like this one, gathering social activists, it's essential that we know that we can't let people who do wrong things for all use some instruments. So it's really important to do that.
Sin embargo, les hemos quitado el Ayuntamiento de Madrid.
And in our case, we've been able to take the municipality of Madrid from them.
Creo que esto enlaza con la lógica que traía al principio.
And this is closely related to the logics we highlighted early at this meeting. Indeed, we can't interpret policies in the stricter sense of the word. And we can't allow grassroots level people to be discarded from some policies. And of course, you can't give to people a TV set or also to have a discourse on austerity. So we can't give them all this. And I think that what is key here is that we all have a vision of the new society that we would like to build. For me, the key element lies in the fact that we have a government who govern for a minority. And this is unbearable. We can't tolerate that because there are people who are hungry, they are cold, they can't make ends meet, and we need to stop that. And what is being done is take power from these people in all the spaces. So I come back to the initial question, and I would also like to highlight another dimension. The vast majority of people need to have the power to decide what they want to do with their lives, and this is impossible for them nowadays. And let me come back to austerity. We have a colleague from the Greens who is here with us at this table, and I think that austerity for the Greens is a concept we can discuss about. And if we agree that we are in a world that is limited, where growth is limited as well, that expenses, be they public and private, should be limited as well. And as Marina said in her speech, it's not about being against or in favor of austerity, but we need to know for whom austerity works and for whom it doesn't.
Por eso creo que lo que tenemos
And I think that the key thing here is the difference between us and the 1% of the population that has half of the wealth in its hand, whereas the remaining 99%, that's to say people who are here, so we have the other half of the wealth, so that's where the key difference lies. We need to avoid that gap from becoming bigger. We need to shrinken that gap and make sure that everybody lives a dignified life. And this requires a new union, it requires efforts, but it also requires us finding solutions, finding alternative solutions, and we need to take as much as we can from them, starting little by little, and by doing that we'll be able to reduce inequalities. And that's the way I view things. Because if we do that, we'll be able to put an end to this kind of governance, to what the elites are doing, to austerity, to TTIP, and to all the instruments the elites use to oppress us. And I think that there is an alternative. We can put an end to the austerity, and we need to take the institutions from the elites, and we need to do that all over Europe. And to conclude, I would like to come back to what's happening in Spain. We have coordinated all the struggles and fights, call it a political umbrella or platform or whatever, but it needs to be an empowering tool for grassroots level populations, for the vast majority of people. We need to see beyond borders, because capitalism doesn't stop at the borders. So we need to fight all together, because if we fight in an isolated way, we we will lose, and we need to see beyond the European borders as well. But let's start with what lies closer to us, that's to say Europe. And it seems to me that we need to look for some specific spaces. And that will be my last point, because I tend to be very talkative. In Aragon, we have a mining area, and in that area, many jobs in the mining industry. There is also a thermal power station providing jobs, and I don't want people to lose their jobs. And there are many Greens here, and it's true that coal is one of the most polluting energy. And if we insist on that, we might lose jobs in mining areas like Aragon. So what we need to do is develop spaces where there is room for trade unions, for the Greens, for SMEs, for self-employed people, for activists and non-activists, for people who are engaged in politics and those who are not. So we need to represent the 99% of people who should rule our world, our lives, and our cities. Thank you very much.
Merci Pablo.
Thank you very much, Pablo. And to conclude, we give the floor to Philippe Lamberts. You are a co-chair of the Greens group at the European Parliament. You are Belgian. I would like to highlight that for Spanish people who are in the room. I don't know if you share the definition of austerity that was highlighted by Pablo Echenique, but generally speaking, how do you see the role to be played by European Parliament in the next couple of months in the debates on Greece, for instance? Thank you very much in advance. Yes, good evening to all of you. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm not going to speak Spanish because my Spanish is too poor, so I will allow myself to speak French. So, the role of the European Parliament, to speak it bluntly, the European Parliament is kind of an observer. So you observe, you see what's happening, and nowadays the European Parliament doesn't have the means to act. Why? Because you don't have the good majorities, but I'll come back to that later, but also because we are not the executive power. However, there is a leverage we can use, and Tsipras insisted on us using it. Austerity, and very often we ask, how is it that a majority of elected representatives, and democracies are not perfect, but they are more or less operational, they work more or less, but how is it that a vast majority of elected representatives work so visibly for such a minority of people? So there's something wrong, and for it to be possible, we need some darkness. It should not be visible, because as soon as it is visible, there is a clash between actions and discourse. But if it happens behind the closed doors of the Eurogroup, of the European Commission, at the level of the ECB, you don't see it. And if you don't see it, you can impose things that have nothing to do with your discourse, because most of the MEPs say that they are in favor of fiscal justice, social justice, peace in the world. They are in favor of everything, but their actions are contradictory. So what we can do at the EP is to implement a legislative document that I've negotiated, and that is part of what we call the two-pack, and that allows the European Parliament to supervise the assistance programs for countries in crisis. And we try to exercise this right. So we will shed light on what's happening between Greece and its creditors. So we're not going to change change the face of the world and what has been written in a deadly memorandum. However, what we will do is shed some light, give visibility to what is being discussed, and maybe we'll be able to avoid the most outrageous measures of this third memorandum. But the question that I'd like to raise, after having listened to the different testimonies, is how can we get out of a system, and Pope Francis insisted on that, how can we get out of a system relying on exploitation of people, of vulnerable people? So where is the way out? Because we've been discussing for hours, but we need a way out, otherwise it will be war, it will be violence. So, the same as you, I am really shocked, and I must say that after 13th of July I was shocked, but I was also angry because there was a denial of European values because of this Greek deal. And when I endure that at a particular point, and we are all different, I want to be violent, to beat people, and at a particular point in time we might say that the system is so violent that the only way to overturn it is to be violent yourself. And I remember a specific moment. It was in December 2014 in Belgium. There was a demonstration of 150,000 people. It was an anti-austerity demonstration, and at the end there was some violence. And I let you guess what was the opening of the news at 8 o'clock on television. It was about these aggressive actions, and then some laws are carried in France and in Belgium. There is more and more surveillance and so on. So to those who would like to become violent, I'd like to say that there are many measures that have been taken by the governments as the consequence of this violence, and that violate freedom. But what we need to do is non-violence resistance, because we need to resist to what's happening. So that's the way we've chosen. So there are many initiatives, and most of us engage in grassroots level initiatives. They would like to change the world from below. It's citizens who would like to take back their fate and their lives, and they want to resist by acting, but also by having another kind of consumption. So any citizen's action, sooner or later, clashes with the violence of prevailing powers, and we need to change. So we need a bottom-up process, but we also need to enter the decision-making processes. And when I see the powers, we will make it. So you see the European Parliament, and unique thinking concerns 540 MEPs. You have conservatives like the EPP or the ICF, the socialists, but also the liberals. So they're more or less in favor of the TINA approach. There is the Frenchy TINA, but there are also our forces, the extreme left, the Greens, and Cinque Stelle. It's 120 MEPs. So 540, 120 versus 120. And then there is yet another alternative. It's scattered here and there, but it's the far right. And in some countries, it's more than Ordoré.
6 ou 7%.
But it's only 6 to 7%. And Marine Le Pen, in some polls, is given winner on second round. So you see that there is an imbalance in powers. And as I said, there is citizens' actions, bottom-up movements, you have the fights and struggles, but we really need to develop some political powers to get some majorities. And there are three prerequisites to do that. We need to educate, because more and more citizens feel in their heads or their belly that the system must change. They start to understand that the system will collapse. And we need to do the lessons to make sure that it's an eye-opener. And we need to show that there is an alternative. There are alternatives. We don't only have a unique thinking with a unique solution. There is a large diversity of alternatives, and it's important for me. There is not one single way to go for the society. There are several ways to go. There are different alternatives, and that's why we are here today. These alternatives exist. They are being developed. Alternative currencies already exist, not only in books. There is yet another way to deal with money. There is alternative consumption. So this is not austerity in the negative meaning of it, but we need to educate to these alternatives. And at the end of the day, we need to get together, to get united. Convergence is important. And if I was our opponents, I would be smiling, because socialists, CPP are united, they have a majority in their coalition, and they are smiling, they are laughing at us, because we represent a large diversity. We scattered here and there. There are sectoral fights, but we also need to get together if we want to be successful. And I'm sure that Pablo and I disagree on some things. And how is your name, Marina? I'm convinced that we don't agree on everything. But what I am aware of is that what we share is stronger than what divides us. And we won't make any gift to our opponents. We're not going to beat one another just to please them. And nobody here has one-size-fits-all solution. So what we need to do is pull our strengths together. We need to develop alternative political forces, but you can't do that overnight. We need to strengthen our credibility. But we still have an instrument to use. It's articulation. So you can take kind of scissors. You have two pieces, a leverage and a bolt uniting the two pieces. And if you take one single part, you can't do anything. But if you take the full tool, if you take social movements on the one hand, and us who are within decision-making processes, and if we articulate our actions, then we will have a leverage to win over the single thinking group, because we will give visibility to their actions and the contradictions between the discourse and the actions. So we will expose them to the general public, and sooner or later they will be put under pressure because they want to win elections, to be powerful. And if there is a big gap between your discourse and your actions, you might not be elected. So we absolutely need to change that, to rebalance the political situation. And that's what we did in Grenoble, in Saragossa, but also in Madrid and in so many cities. We built up coalitions of all people working for change. And if you do that, you can win a majority and start to change things. And what is disappointing to me is that these coalitions only exist at local level, but we need them at national level to be able to build these coalitions at European level. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Merci beaucoup. Je crois qu'on va passer à la conclusion.
Thank you very much, and I think that we will move on to the conclusions of the conference. Thank you very much. Am I right, Felipe?
Felipe et Pedro pour la conclusion.
Felipe and Pedro for the conclusions of the night.
Avant de vous en aller, s'il vous plaît,
yes, before you leave, please, can you stay for one more minute?
Il est tard.
It's late.
Vous avez été patient.
You've been patient. It's been a long evening with many speakers. So let me thank some people before the concluding remarks. I'll do that with my compañero Pedro. Thank you very much to Sebastian Franco, who has prepared this evening conference in very difficult conditions. I would also like to say to all the people who think that we were badly organized during 3 days. It's true, but we have developed 3 days here in Brussels with people from many countries, but we only had half full-time persons. So thank you very much, Sebastian. We would have needed more staff to do it better. And limit the applauses because it takes too much time. Thank you very much for Monique and Marie-Agnès who managed the headsets. I also want to thank the interpreters because they enabled you to use your own language. Thank you very much. Gracias. And I would like to thank the delegations who've been in Brussels for 3 days, 11 delegations from Europe. This is a success, even if these days have not been as successful as we wished. So there were 11 delegations. Thank you very much to the comrades from Greece, from Spain. More than 50 activists are coming from Greece. They come from self-managed clinics, but also from migrants movements, Syriza's youth. 3 days in a coach to come to Brussels, and they represent a fight in Greece, a fight we've been supporting and that we will continue to support. Thank you very much for coming. And to conclude, before I move on to the political conclusions and next steps, I would like to remind you that tomorrow, Saturday, 17th of October, International Day on Poverty, we invite you to a picnic at 12 at the European Parliament at noon, and then we will be marching to the center of Brussels, and we will listen to the choir singing freedom songs. So please be numerous tomorrow at noon. And I will ask Pedro to answer a question. How can we see the next step of our fight on behalf of Euromarchers who co-organize this event? Thank you very much, Felipe. I'm not going to be long, but we just invite you to work, to continue to act. So as from tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we will be preparing the Euromarches 2016. So we need to be on time. This time we needed to be on time with our Greek friends, but now we need to work hard amongst all the countries. So we are in the run-up to the Euromarches 2016. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro. Thanks to all of you. And the fight continues for Europe to no longer be ruled by a minority of oligarchs, but by people whom we represent. Thank you very much.